All right, now, guys, it is time for the most exciting part of the show, as usual, and that is a moment in African history. All right, okay. Right, today's a follow-up story from last week's story. Remember last week's tale was from the 1300s about the Malian Empire and the ancient legendary city of Timbuktu? Well, today we're going to find out 800 years later what happened to all those precious manuscripts that were written back then. We're talking about manuscripts that are over 1500 years old. Some of them, they're like literally, if you touch them too hard, they probably crumble in your hands or something. And they all exist. Well, most of them existed and survived all those years. So now what has happened to them? Where are they? And were they in danger? Let's find out. Today we're telling the tale of the renegade librarians of Timbuktu. What? And their race to save the world's most precious manuscripts. So throughout history, book lovers, curators, and librarians, have always stepped in to save books and documents from extinction in times of turmoil. Well, the same goes for the brave souls in Mali who did the same for the precious Timbuktu manuscripts when ISIS came to their country. So let's hear. In 2012, jihadists armed to the teeth with weapons seized in Libya after the fall of Gaddafi overran northern Mali and established a brutal Sharia regime in Timbuktu. Once a center of learning and culture, the city housed a priceless collection of manuscripts, volumes of poetry, encyclopedia, and even sexual manuals that invoke the name of Allah. Threatened with destruction, the manuscripts were spirited out of the city to safety in a thrilling cloak and dagger operation. Several of the great travelers of the Renaissance in the 15th to 16th centuries passed through Timbuktu and described it as a thriving commercial center. We heard that last week. It had camel caravans and traders on boats on the river Niger, bearing everything from linens and teapots from England to gold out of the rainforests of Central Africa. Alongside the commerce, there was also an intense academic tradition in the city. Timbuktu was a university town during its golden age. Many of these universities were operated out of mosques, so you had a lot of books and manuscripts being created for the scholars. You also had a lot of wealthy families that valued learning. Powerful Timbuktu families measured their importance by the books they accumulated on Greek philosophy, poetry, love stories, guides to, astronomy, traditional medicine, as well as religious books. They would be copied by scribes and accumulated both in universities and in private homes. So huge libraries were created, numbering in the thousands of volumes. Nobody knows how many manuscripts were in the city at its peak, but almost suddenly were in the hundreds of thousands. It's now the modern day, and enter Abdel Kader Hadera, the son of a scholar from Timbuktu. His father ran an Islamic school in the oldest quarter of the city, and so Abdel grew up around these manuscripts. When he was 17, his father died, and of his 12 siblings, his father made him the heir to the family book collection, which numbered in the thousands at the time. Abdel was studious and fluent in Arabic, the language in which many of the manuscripts were written. A few years later, the curator for the National Library in Timbuktu called on Abdel. He asked him if he would take on a job traveling around the countryside, visiting villages and nomadic encampments, trying to track down some of the ancient manuscripts that had been dispersed into the desert. Timbuktu had been conquered by the Moroccans in the 1590s, and a lot of the books were spirited out of the city at that time. Abdel agreed and began trudging around the countryside in trying to persuade these villagers to give up their precious family heirlooms and turn them over to the National Library in Timbuktu. He proved to be incredibly successful. He even found manuscripts stashed away in dark storage rooms or caves in the desert. Can you imagine this guy? He built the National Library into a great institution and turned in his own family's collection into a library in Timbuktu. He raised money and he got other librarians involved. Okay, so we've done all that. We've got the National Library. The manuscripts are safe, right? Then, by the year 2000, that's 2000, Timbuktu had become a cultural boomtown that had recaptured some of the glory of its heyday in the 16th century when it was a scholastic center of North Africa. By the time of the jihadi invasion in 2012, Abdel had assembled a collection of 377,000 1,000 manuscripts. He especially valued these books because they showed a more tolerant side of Islam, which of course represented a worldview that was an anathema to the jihadists. Now, enter Abu Zaid, who alongside Mokhtar Belmokhtar, an Algerian jihadist, had become hardened fighting in Afghanistan and took over the northern Mali between January and April in 2012. In the chaos of the uprising against Gaddafi, the jihadists raided the Amiris of Libya, took weapons into Mali, and quickly swept across the northern part of the country, occupying all of the major towns, including Timbuktu. They imposed Sharia law and began to destroy every symbol of the moderate Sufi Islam that almost all the residents subscribed to. Shrines of Sufi saints were destroyed, whippings were carried out in public quarters in the city, and of course the manuscripts were threatened, the precious manuscripts. Abdelkader became extremely concerned about the survival of the manuscripts and knew something had to be done to save them, and so he and the other librarians came up with a plan. There are three stages of the operation. The first, they moved them out of the big libraries of Timbuktu into safe houses around the city, and they did it at night, putting the manuscripts in boxes and moved them by donkey cart to people's basements and storage rooms. And secondly, a couple of months later, they moved them out of the city by vehicle, one vehicle after the other, in constant motion, often being escorted by teenage couriers over 600 miles of desert, passing through checkpoints and bluffing their way all the way to Bamako, in the capital in the south. And the third phase, after the French army invaded and became too dangerous to move the books around by road, it involved them taking the boat up the river Niger towards Bamako and then offloading them by boat and putting them into taxis. It was an elaborate and dangerous process that went on for months right under the noses of the jihadists. Eventually, there's a military showdown in Mali with French and Canadian forces assisting, and the jihadists were wiped out. But manuscripts are right now still being stored in Bamako, and no one knows when they'll be returned to Timbuktu. They've all been collected in one large storage facility in Bamako, so they have been brought together under one roof. They're being digitized, and those that were damaged in the course of smuggling are now being carefully restored. Meanwhile, Abdelkader is keeping an eye on the situation in Timbuktu. He would love to take them back, but he doesn't know if the time is right. The jihadists are infiltrating the southern part of the country, which they were never able to do at the height of the occupation in the north. They might not ever be able to mount a major operation to seize territory, but they're still out there. The safety of the manuscripts is the priority, and for now, they're safe in Bamako. But one day, they will return to their true home in Timbuktu. Done. What do you guys think?